Hello everyone, Morai here. Today I'm going to do a special little video where I discuss toxicity in the community. There is a Reddit post that was actually put up that was pointed out to me thanks to Technically PvP on their Twitter, or their X, I guess, of a player that posted about his experience of returning to the game that I thought was really interesting. So as you can see, I have it up in front of me here. It is a post made by Janky Jokester about 13 days ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, kind of go through what he says and give my feedback on it as well. Anybody that knows me, I discuss a lot that I think the sentiment that the WoW community, especially the WoW PvP community, is extremely toxic is really overblown just from my own experiences. And I play a lot of WoW and a lot of WoW PvP, so I don't see a lot of what other people see. So this is going to be kind of my take on this Reddit post and what I'm going to kind of go through it and give my thoughts. So as you can see, the title is "The Community is Much Less Toxic Than It's Made Out to Be a Returning Player." So let's start by reading it here. It says, I have been back about a week now with over 50 arenas done and about 20 BGs. This sub would have you think that it's a cesspool. It is not. In fact, it is better than it has ever been. So their return with 50 arenas, 20 BGs, which isn't a huge sample size, but it's decent enough, is that they don't see the toxicity that this Reddit points out quite a bit. And it's not just Reddit. Twitter does this. The Blizzard forums does this as well. They would have you think that, again, the WoW PvP community is a toxic cesspool. So they go on to say, out of all the games, I have seen two issues. One solo shuffle a healer who got popped on left. And like the fifth BG I did, we had people crying about my low stats, which does happen. I don't know why people do this in regular BGs. Regular BGs is casual content. That's what it's there for. I know it can be frustrating if if one team is stacked and are really geared and the other team is low geared, has more low geared players. That can be frustrating. They need to kind of find a way to balance that out. There's a bunch of different ways they can do that. I'm not going to discuss this in this video though. I had just finished a campaign and got to 70 and was starting to grind for auto gear. So that's kind of where they were at when they entered that BG. Otherwise, it's been great. A few twos partners gone after a game, which happens. People just leave. Games don't go all, they just leave, which happens to me. People just leave. They don't really say anything. They just go. And after a game or two, some people would GGs or thanks for the games, which I get that as well. Now, you will get people that will blame you and leave. That does happen as well, but this person did not have that experience. Mainly some suggestions like you should be doing X and be doing Y, which I do get that as well. We'll give that out for myself if I can to other players that I'm playing with. Give suggestions, which they were right, and I'm relearning whatever. So they kind of point out that they're relearning and they're taking the feedback in stride as, okay, you're correct. This is what I need to do. And I think a lot of times what happens, and this is used a lot, is somebody's being toxic to me, is people pointing out mistakes. And they may not always do it in the best way. That will happen as well. But sometimes it's a competitive environment. People get frustrated. Now, there's ways you can do it. Obviously, you don't want to be calling people names and slurs and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of going over the top. But some people will just be blunt. They'll say, you're not doing this. And people will be like, oh, you're being toxic to me. They don't like being told that they're doing something wrong. They immediately take that as toxic. And that happens all the time. I've seen that in BGs. Somebody will say, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing that. They're kind of pointing out what's going on and why the BG is going wrong. And people in chat immediately start calling the person toxic. That's happened to me before, where I've kind of started giving instructions, and I've even been threatened to be reported because I'm talking too much in chat. It's kind of a weird concept. It doesn't happen a lot. Again, this isn't something I see all the time, but it does happen. People kind of overreacting to people giving instructions or giving suggestions. That does happen, and it's a lot of times pegged as someone being toxic. So they go on to say, in fact, out of all the recent games I've been playing, the PvP community thus far has been the best one in years. So that's their overall experience in the last few years. This is the best it's been. Now, again, it's a small sample size as one person that doesn't spread out through the whole community. Obviously, people are going to have other things to say, but that's kind of their take on it from the games that they've done since they've been back. Anyway, that's all. I just wanted to post because I always see posts complaining about people being toxic. From the outside coming in, as far as games go, it's pretty good. Also, this is just them looking for a partner, anyone looking for some PvP, I'm getting back into shape, 1600 in SS already, finally starting not to fumble my buttons, LOL. So that's kind of their take on things. I love seeing this post because you do not see posts like this very often. And it's not because the community is super toxic, in my opinion. It's because largely negative experiences are going to be posted about more than positive experiences. That's just people are mad, they're upset, they feel like they've been wronged, and they want to vent about it. So, whereas a positive experience, largely people are happy, they're not going to want to vent about it or go to the forums or find a place to vent about it. It's just the way things go. It happens in a bunch of different spots. So let's kind of go through some of the comments here. So this person says 99% of people under the range of 1800 or even 2K are semi-casual, decent people. I have a lot of friends hanging in the Duelist Clad area, and that's where it could become truly a hot box. It always has been. I kind of agree with this. A lot of times on Twitter, on the forums, on Reddit, or even on people's streams, a lot of times the people pointing out that the community is super toxic are people that are playing at higher ratings, where it's a lot more competitive. People are going to get a lot more upset if they lose rating. They're there because they want to be at the top of the ladder, and they're competing for those spots at the top of the ladder. That's just my take on things. That's kind of always going to happen, in my opinion. At those types of ratings, people are largely going to be a lot more toxic, quote unquote, at those ratings. But even then, I think what is toxic and what isn't is largely overblown. A lot of people just don't like to be told they did something wrong. That's just how things go. They overreact to it, etc. Now, toxicity does happen. Obviously, it's been pointed out and posted about. But again, largely the spots I see on Reddit, when people get upset, they're going to post about it on Twitter, Reddit, etc. That's just how things are going to go. As we move down here, let's look at a couple more real quick. Every game has its bad eggs, which is true, and Solo Shuffle has definitely made more of them rear their heads. Now, this is something that I've pointed out to people that I've talked to a bunch of times. Solo Shuffle is a different game, especially for players that are really good, that are used to pushing threes with a team. The reason that is because they live in a bubble. Now, that's not me being like bashing them. That's just how it is. They live in a bubble. They have the teammates they play with. They're playing with largely players, or actually mostly all players that are of the same skill level than them, that are going to know what to do in certain situations when they climb the ladder. Now, in Solo Shuffle, they don't have a choice. They're going to be playing, as they climb, they're going to be playing with players that are at no experience, low experience, middle experience, duelist, low glad, high glad. It's just going to be all over the place as they climb. So they're going to run into players that have no idea what's going on and players that have a lot of idea what's going on. And they are not used to having to play with players like that, and they're forced into it in a Solo Shuffle environment, which makes a lot more frustrating for them because they're just used to playing with people and they expect the other person to know what's going, to basically have the same game knowledge as them and know when to trade this, when not to trade, when to run, when to burst, all that kind of stuff. For the most part, the players that they played with in a regular 3v3 environment with a team are all going to have a pretty good idea of what is going on in those situations. Rank 1 players largely play with rank 1 players, Glad players largely play with Glad players, etc. So that is just why I think Rated Solo Shuffle has kind of reared their ugly heads of people that are more toxic. And a lot of times, I'm not even going to say that those players are toxic. A lot of it's just frustration that boils over into toxicity. And it does get pretty toxic sometimes. Like, I think sometimes some of the streamers that stream Solo Shuffle forget that the players that they're harping on that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing in Solo Shuffle are also largely the people that are watching them as well. So they need to, I think they kind of have to keep that in mind, but they're used to playing with players that know what they're doing. And when they run into people that don't know what they're doing, it's going to be extremely frustrating. It's going to hurt them. It's going to cause them to lose rating. So but again, I pointed this out before Solo Shuffle even started. People are going to have to get used to that. That's just what's going to happen. You have to kind of work your way around that, especially if you're going to be using Solo Shuffle as content. You just kind of have to deal with that. And I think they have to do a little bit more if they want players to improve, to kind of point those things out to people without trying to be toxic. And some players do. I've watched the streamers I mainly watch do that with people. As frustrated as I've seen them get, they do that with people. So if I scroll down a little bit here, this is a comment I kind of want to point out. I don't play a lot of other games. The only other games I played is Overwatch mainly, and before that I was kind of an EA Sports, Madden, NBA 2K player. So before WoW, I was mostly just a sports game player. I do play a little bit Overwatch now, not as much recently, but I have played quite a bit in the past. So I don't have a lot of experience in other games as far as toxicity, but I've heard stories. I've seen this point out a lot that League of Legends is extremely bad. I've heard about the old lobbies and like I think it's Call of Duty, things like that. So yeah, I think a lot of times things are pretty overblown when it comes to WoW as far as how bad the community actually is. Now this one says, let's look at this one real quick. Well, because Blizzard bans them if they go too far, Blizzard has allowed it, and this community would be a toxic waste pool. I'm not really sure what this is supposed to mean, but I've seen this pointed out before that Blizzard has allowed the community to get to this point, and now that they're banning people for it. So this is kind of a double-edged sword. It is on Blizzard to control the toxicity in their game to a point. But I think it's weird that players and the community also doesn't want to take responsibility for this. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to be toxic if Blizzard allows it. It's like, okay, then, but you're still the one being toxic. You don't have to be toxic. So this is always a weird take to me when people kind of point out that Blizzard allowed it. Well, the community allowed it too, and the community is the one that's doing it. So it's kind of a weird thing to me. Of course, Blizzard has to do their part with and be able to like moderate that stuff. But again, the community is the one that's doing it themselves. It's kind of like to kind of put all the blame on Blizzard is kind of unfair to me when it comes to that kind of stuff. And so we scroll down. A lot of this other stuff is just people pointing out other games, things about smurfing, things like that. But I just thought this post would be interesting to point out because again, you don't see posts like this very often pointing out the community isn't toxic from their point of view. And this is something I've given my take on a lot, that people peg the community as super toxic. They peg the whole WoW community and the PvP community as being super toxic, when my experience overall is that it is not. With the amount of BGs I do, a lot of my arena has been done through LFG. I think people just got to take in stride of what is toxic and what is somebody just trying to kind of give you direction, even if it's for their own benefit. If they're not really trying to help you, they're just trying to give you direction to make it easier for them. And some people are just blunt, like in a text, a lot of it's through text. So if you're not into voice, you got to take that into consideration. It's text as well. So you can't just like look at a text and be like, oh my God, that person is trying to flame me, when maybe they just didn't want to type out an entire paragraph to you to explain something. They just made it really short and blunt. That's a possibility too. So, and I've seen people make points of like, well, when I enter BGs, all it is people flaming each other. Or there's like, sometimes I even get it's one or two people that are flaming everybody. Well, those one or two people out of 30 people in a BG or 20 people in a BG the stat is still overall pretty low. And again, most of the BGs I do, it's not people flaming each other. It's mostly short sentences, telling people to do this, asking why people aren't doing that. Again, you have to take into stride in a competitive environment. People are going to get frustrated. And a lot of what they say is going to be blunt to the point. Especially in text, they're not able to say it in voice, so they're trying to play the game and type out what they're doing at the same time. That's just kind of my take on things. I think a lot of the WoW community is toxic, or the WoW PvP community is super toxic, is overblown, and a lot of it is taken from the higher echelons of competitive PvP and not the overall look from the WoW community as a whole. It's just kind of taken from clips from Twitter or from Reddit or from the forums. It's just kind of, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from, and it's kind of parroted a lot. It does cause people to not want to do PvP because they see this kind of stuff and like, oh my God, I don't want to have to experience that. So they just don't do it. And then I've asked people why when they say PvP is so toxic, and I'll ask them like, oh, have you had experience with it? Like, well, yeah, this one time in a BG, someone called me bad. It's like, okay. So you did it, your experiences from one BG or this one time in a BG where somebody called you bad isn't a good overall, how do I say it? Isn't a good overall experience to gather from as far as the PvP community being toxic. Because I can take that experience from Mythic Plus and raiding, it happens there too. People just got to kind of take that stuff in stride. There's some people that won't even do PvP or even Mythic Plus without people of their own because they are so afraid of somebody being toxic to them, when in the large part, you're never going to meet new people that way, for one. You're always going to be confined to your own little bubble, and you're just going to have this thing in your head that everybody in the whole game is toxic, when you've really only set yourself to a very small experience level or a very small percentage of the player base to even base that off of. So I feel like a lot of times people just have one bad experience and they just peg that as that this is what's going to happen all the time, when as someone that's played this game for 20 years, done a lot of BGs, done a lot of LFG for Arena in the past, for RBGs as well. Most largely, it's just people being competitive, short, blunt sentences. A lot of times, nothing's even said. There's been a lot of BGs where the chat is just empty and I'm the only one saying, hey, let's go to BS is under attack or stables. And a lot of times there's not even anything said at all. So, and that's even in classic, not just retail. So people kind of got to broaden their horizons a little bit. And I'll kind of throw this in there. I've seen this before where somebody will say something and it's not really toxic. It's just kind of a short, blunt sentence. And someone will react really badly to it or call that person toxic. And then that other person reacts badly back to them. So it kind of starts this whole chain. So it ends up kind of being the person that calls someone else toxic is actually the one that started the toxic interaction. So by reacting really badly to something that probably was just a short sentence of, hey, do this, or you're not doing this, and they took it the wrong way. So I think people just kind of experience the community. We want to build it. We don't want to continue to push this narrative that everything is so toxic and you don't want to do PvP because of that. I think that is a terrible way to go about things, and we need to start building the community up, start showing people the positives more, positive experiences. I think that would be great instead of just retweeting every negative thing you see on Twitter or quoting everything you see on the forums or Reddit. I think that's just the wrong way to go about it. That's just my take. Let me know in the comments if you agree, disagree, what your experiences have been. Like, subscribe, all that kind of fancy stuff. But I know I haven't done a video in a little bit, but I was reorganizing the room that my setup is in, and I got a new mic. So hopefully my new mic sounds a lot better than my previous one. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.